Well, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this video. We're looking forward very much to seeing you at the Central Asia Trade Forum on day 3. And that's the day where our expert panel will be discussing key issues around digitalization and connectivity. And that's taking place in the afternoon on the 6th of October. That's the Wednesday of the conference. My name's Jon Harris. I'm the International Education and Business Development Lead at the Chartered Institute of Logistics and Transport. And CILT is responsible for running this particular forum. We're delighted to have one of the panelists with us, and he's going to give you a bit of insight into his world today. So with no more ado, let me introduce to you David Cross, a very experienced logistics professional that now has his own consultancy. Welcome, David.
Hello, everyone. As Jon said, I'm David Cross. I've actually grown up with containers. I first went to work with containers back in 1978. So for more than 40 years, my professional life has been always associated with containers. Brief claims to fame. Well, I took some of the first containers into Zimbabwe back in the very early 80s. And then also in the 80s, we took the first 2 containers to arrive from Europe into Laos. And we did that by hiring a landing craft across the mighty Mekong River. So big projects, small projects. I've, I think, been lucky enough to be associated with lots of container development. And I see this movement in Central Asia now as being sort of very interesting and something that I could perhaps lend some weight to, some knowledge to, some experience to. So an interesting part, I think, and we can learn from the liner shipping businesses that have emerged over the last 30 or 40 years, is the hub and spoke system is very much part of their world. In Singapore, there's a huge hub and spoke operation. In Malta, there's another one. And indeed, they, if you like, provide an example of what I think we might be looking at here in Central Asia, where you don't necessarily have to have a ship or a train going to every single place. In Singapore and in Malta, I believe less than 10% of the freight that goes through those ports is actually for those rather small countries. So the rest of it then is coming to a central point, that's the hub, and being delivered in their case by smaller ships called feeder ships from the hub along the spokes to, I think in Singapore's case, probably 40 or 50 countries, and in Malta's case, all around the Mediterranean and indeed into North Africa. So I think in terms of development of Central Asia, we can perhaps learn from that. And I think the obvious place to have a think about that is indeed in Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is a big country. It's very well placed geographically. And I sort of have an idea that to bring freight trains into Kazakhstan and then, if you like, have a feeder train, for want of a better word, to go to the countries in the region might very well be something that we need to be considering, we need to be developing, and I think importantly, we need to be learning from the experience, both setting it up and the good points and the bad points of what's gone wrong in other parts of the world. So that's something I think I have knowledge of, something I can bring to the table.
Excellent. No, thank you, David. I mean, I think you described very clear, almost your career journey in connectivity and coming to the present with the Central Asia region now. With rail, just one question for you. I mean, there's a key opportunity here, hubbing around Kazakhstan, as you describe, with the other countries feeding in. But just from your own kind of insights, are there any key issues around physical connectivity or any other limitations that you think need to be looked at, just from your own personal opinion?
Yeah, I think there are, Jon. I mean, I think the point I would make about connectivity, perhaps in the video generally, is that once we sort of establish the concept, everyone's got to be sort of buying into it. And you might say to me, well, mention so-and-so because he's the man who can fix it. Because, this country is a good example where there are lots of people buying into the idea of carbon reduction, freight from road to rail, but the railway companies are probably at the back of that line.
So absolutely, there's a bit of a kind of what I would call a glue roll and plugging this together and saying, well, what's the business case? What's the appetite for trade movement, both internally within Central Asia by rail, but also more strategically? Let's move from that to another key theme that CILT is looking at, certainly, and that's the theme of decarbonisation. Now, with COP26 just around the corner, what role do you think rail travel has to play in reducing emissions along that east-west trade corridor? And of course, there's already trains running from China through to London and Europe, but also globally. Just reflect on that if you can for us, David.
Decarbonisation has come to the fore in the year 2021, and now the general public, local government, central government have, hopefully, all being well, understood that we must start decarbonisation. Transport in all its forms is a provider of too much CO2, and therefore all of us, I think it's about all of us, wherever we are, must consider and have a look about how we can do better. And I think in terms of rail transport, a fast, high-speed, long-length, electrically hauled freight train actually ticks most of the boxes in terms of decarbonisation. That might mean taking freight from a ship, it might mean taking freight from the road, it might mean, moving freight in a different way. But I absolutely do think that a high-speed, electrically hauled, long train, perhaps 750 meters, is the best way to evidently show that decarbonisation can be done without service suffering. Now, I accept that there has to be some connectivity with all of that. All the parties involved have to want to do this. And I think there are the business cases to be made, which will say, well, if we did it this way, we could save so much CO2. There may be some additional cost. I think that has to be gone through, but it doesn't always mean there is additional cost. And the really important thing I think that we've learned here in the UK in the last 3-4 years is that we've set up, well, they've been set up for a long time, but nothing much happened, something called sort of strategic rail freight interchanges, where a large piece of land, might be 600-800 acres, something of that nature, would be made available, often a brownfield site. There's one very good example here in the UK of an old colliery that used to mine coal, has been turned into one of these sites. And in plain language, these sites are coping with trains, trucks, and warehouses, all on the same site, all in the same place, all with the same fence around them. And the local connectivity in terms of road and rail and no shunting and moving around the yard, you try and find a site that is out of the way. Therefore, the site can work peacefully during the night and at weekends without impacting people who live round about. But these sites now in the UK, after sort of a gestation period of 6 to 10 years, are now beginning to appear. There's one in Yorkshire, there's one in the East Midlands, there's one being developed in Glasgow in Scotland, and there will be others, because I think the merchants, the shipping lines, the train companies, the public, the local government are now all of the view that if you have all this activity centralized in one spot, you can save money. It stops dozens of little places becoming an environmental embarrassment or noisy or upsetting people. So the idea of having everything in one place, I think is very sensible. And one bonus point, actually, which we've established in England here, is that when you do that, the impact on the local community can be very significant. The area I referred to around a colliery was an area which needed regeneration. And actually, by bringing this strategic rail freight interchange to the old colliery site, the number of small businesses that have emerged as a result of the trains and the trucks being there is very encouraging. I'm talking mechanics, I'm talking tea shops, I'm talking tire shops, I'm talking all sorts of activity which has helped, if you like, reinvigorate an area that, for example, was once a colliery. And I think because the size of the site, the scope of the site, all these things together now, it works in this country, which is a small country. So I've every reason to believe it would work in Central Asia, which are generally bigger countries. And that facilitates moving these feeder trains from one hub, perhaps along the spoke to perhaps a smaller hub in a related country, and then back again. And that's end-to-end trains. They don't have to stop. They don't have to be shunted. And they're all being dealt with the same sort of precision, the same sort of kit, the same sort of documentation. And I do think this is absolutely the way for the development of modern logistics to be taking place, across Central Asia and beyond, with the links that are there already. Now, in Kazakhstan, there are some container trains already. There's as a rail service comes from Xinjiang to Almaty. So, and we know that works, and it works very well. But I think there's more to do here. And I think, if the country is experiencing containers a little bit, because more and more commodities are moving around in containers now, because there's less and less specialized ships, then I think we can build upon the existing service, add to that some of the experience we've had elsewhere in the world, and hopefully we will come up with a blueprint for the whole area, which will increase and improve the efficiency of the logistics and transport by several 100%.
Excellent, David. I mean, quite a menu of ideas there. Almost reflecting and having visited Kazakhstan on a number of occasions, it's almost like the Korgos Gateway Plus, but looking at how something like those intermodal terminals actually serve more of a regional hub role, how things could actually feed off them, and really to build the capacity. We know that the technology is there. We know that the land is there. You picked up a word, documentation, in your last answer, and I just want to pick up on that. Thinking about the processes and removal of trade barriers, what needs to happen in both the rail and the customs sectors to make rail an easier choice? And this is around your documentations and things that go behind choosing to send some goods by rail.
Yeah, John, documentation is very important to the movement of goods. And by documentation, its wider sense, I mean customs checks, I mean proving ownership of the goods. And for many, many years in ocean transport, and I grew up with them as well, the bill of lading was the document. It was a document of title. In the very early days, it was handwritten. It was given to the man who presented the container to you as a receipt, and he sent it to his buyer, and the buyer presented the bill of lading and obtained the cargo on the other side of the world. The world, of course, has moved on since then. Air freight led the way. Air freight came with airway bills really quite a long time ago now, which made that they had to renew the process or review the process because the air flight was perhaps only a few hours. So that was the first stage. I think modern digitization will in fact make that much more efficient and much more interesting, but there still remains the need to cross borders, the need to satisfy local customs authorities, and indeed the need to convince or reassure the owner of the goods that his goods are not going to be tampered with or lost or all the other things that can happen to things on the move. So I think that there's a piece of work to be done here. And I think that, as I say, digitalization will help that, but it is a piece of work. There are trains now moving across Asia regularly, Germany to China, one or two to other countries in Europe, and they are coping, they're keeping time, they're not being delayed at the border, there's no theft to speak of. So I do think that the situation we have now is working, but I think with the advent of digitization of freight, it can work better, it can be made more secure, there can be less time spent at borders, although there aren't that many border checks in the old-fashioned sense of the word. But I do think it's an area where, if we are setting up something new in Central Asia, then the documentation processes, all of them, from cargo ownership to clearing of customs, should be part of that review, should be looked at, and maybe we will come up with a sort of a Central Asian blueprint that the rest of the world can adopt, because in some areas, even some quite mature economies, there's still quite a lot of paper and people passing notes to each other and writing things down in a pencil and taking them inside and inputting them to a keyboard. And all of that sort of thing, I believe, in the 21st century should be on its way out. So this exciting project we have must include the sort of, the documentation. And indeed, I think if we do it properly and we get it right, that maybe could be exportable to other parts of the world.
So yeah, thank you very much, David, for bringing in digitalization into the last answer there, and realizing the balance between the role of digital and wider perhaps infrastructure improvements and things that need to happen in order to support this rail connectivity. Let's come to our last question, and it's really a visionary question that I'm asking you, not just about Central Asia, but just from your whole experience. What would the main features be for you for a really good connected rail freight experience? And what I mean there is one that is international in its service. What would be the must-have features that you'd look for?
Good question, John. I think, can we go back to sea transport for a second? Over the last 10 years, ships have grown from about 10 or 15,000 TEU. I think the biggest one now is 24,000 TEU. That, perhaps 12,000 40-foot containers or thereabouts, that's an enormous amount of freight to bring to anyone at any one time. So my sort of vision is, and it's working in this small island here now, is to remove the freight from the ship in efficient ports, and then get as much as you can onto the railways and to take the freight to where it's going to be required. So instead of trying to unpack everything at Felixstowe and then move the freight around the country in single trucks, that clearly can't work, shouldn't work, won't be allowed to work now because people will be sensitive about traffic and carbon and so on. So I think if I had a completely clean page, I'd say, right, meet the source of the cargo, be that a country or a port, with trains, and have those trains going to different destinations, and therefore taking the clearance of the goods, the unpacking of the goods, the checking of the goods, the local distribution of the goods away from the central point to where the goods are required. Now that brings us back conveniently to Central Asia, because if you had that in the largest country, in Kazakhstan, to bring the goods to the point, and then, as we spoke before about using feeder trains as opposed to feeder ships to take them from Kazakhstan to other countries in the region, that, if you like, it means you don't create a bottleneck. All the time you're thinking about reduce the bottleneck, take the freight away, take it to a single point, to the hub, move it to where it's required, and then for export freight on the way back, the containers will be in position, they'll be empty available, put the export freight in those same containers, and then bring them back to the hub. And then in Central Asia's case, the big trains, in inverted commas, would run from the hub, east and west, north and south, to deliver the sort of service that these emerging countries will require. So I think if I had complete choice, it would be that. And to build upon the example, I mean, in Northern Europe, a lot of German freight goes into Rotterdam. Rotterdam's quite close to Germany, but the trains run from Rotterdam to Germany. What I'm saying is it doesn't have to go to a German port to get into Germany. So the connectivity, the ease of crossing the border, back to documentation, digitalization again, all of those things are part of this exciting project to say we are going to get the most efficient means of transport with 21st century ideas to work in that part of the world.
Thank you very much indeed, David, for that really comprehensive answer. There's some really good golden principles there that you shared around what a really connected intermodal service looks like, and some of the things that you'd look for to make sure that it's low carbon and it's effective as possible. Well, everyone, we've run out of time now, but I just want to say a very big thank you for David giving up his time to come and speak to you ahead of the Central Asia Trade Forum. Just a reminder, of course, that the main transport and logistics panel will be meeting on day 3, and that's Wednesday, the 6th of October. And we look forward to seeing you there then.